And welcome back, everybody. It is Red Hot Talk, another new episode today with Rod Lawton. You guys seen the title. We're going to talk a little bit about retro camera slash photography slash technology. Seems like a handful, but there are a lot of things we'd like to discuss today. And before we continue, so just say welcome, everybody. And no, we need some time for people to join in a little bit later, and but we can certainly kick off with what we want to talk about today. Rod has seen many camera. He's a photojournalist and editor, of course, and for magazines and websites. So he has a wealth of knowledge of different type of cameras, and also the industry itself. And I say myself as a photographer and filmmaker, so I deal with a lot of commercial clients over the past 15-16 years. So together, hopefully we can bring you some interesting content. And as if you missed any of our previous episode, you can also stream on demand through our playlist in the YouTube page. So good morning and afternoon, Anthony, Alfonso, Dr. Matthew, and Carl. I'm pretty sure more will join a little bit later on. So what prompted today's discussion is basically the launch of ZFC last week, together with a lot of reactions over the past few months about Olympus or slash OM system. We keep saying Olympus, OM systems. Fanboys and fangirls, talking about the whether they should resurrect the PEN series. We kind of had talked about it as well, Rod and I. The PEN series seems to be the only range they're kind of missing at the moment, because the OMD has now become the OM series. The PEN seems to be kind of left behind a little bit. So we've been talking about a little bit about PEN F, whether they should release PEN F2. So all this combined to form today's discussion, because it's going to be quite interesting. Because from my personal perspective, I think the retro kind of theme is definitely back in fashion now. I know Olympus kind of started the whole thing off with the original PEN EP1 when the first Micro Four Thirds kind of thing starting to kick off. So that to me, Olympus was the pioneer in terms of in resurrecting infuse the retro styling into modern digital cameras. And then they kind of continued that theme for a few years, and everybody kind of caught on to the same thing. Fujifilm did the XT series, the X Pro series, the X100 series. And then, you can see that kind of theme really slowly to build up. And all of a sudden, like Olympus, towards the end, before they changed over to OM system, they modernized everything. They kind of like, scaling down on the PEN series, scaling down on the kind of like the retro theme. I know they kept the OM5, which is essentially the EM5 series, which is kind of carried over from the even previous predecessor, the EM5 Mark 1 and Mark 2. The styling hasn't really changed that much. So the whole discussion today is just to see whether this new trend, this new push now, is going to be the force will drive the camera sales further in the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about technology as well, because we can't talk about retro camera and styling without talking about technologies. So we're going to talk a little bit about whether the photography trend itself is also going backward a little bit, going to the retro, like film, like having this film simulations, the negatives and things like that. So we're going to have a whole discussion about all this stuff today, all relating to stepping back in time, going to be retro, a little bit hipster style, and also in terms of photography itself, the styling, the color tones and everything like that, whether that is the trend right now. So Rob, let's start with you. You have used many cameras, Let me ask you in terms of usability first, without going through all this styling, because this is very personal, very like preferential thing. But in terms of usability, how do you feel about adopting retro camera styling in for modern photography? Because how camera are shaped these days, especially the high-end cameras, they have grips and have contours and things like that. So making sure it fits properly in hand. But the thing is about going retro is they're all very boxy, it's just going back in time. It doesn't hold very well. And what do you think about this? If you're really going back, would that affect any users?
Yeah, I think it does. But I think there are two things to think about here. First of all, there's the styling and handling, and then there's the controls. So styling and handling, that I guess that's a personal preference. I do like, I suppose my favorite style has for a while been the chunky DSLR style with rounded corners and big grip and good solid hefty cameras. I'm not a big fan of boxy mirrorless camera designs, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to use them. It's just I kind of don't enjoy them very much by comparison. I think the other question is, do we want to go back to traditional controls, i.e., shutter speed dial, ISO dial, and lens aperturing? So yeah, it's two things. One of them is how the camera handles. The other is how you operate it. So I think retro cameras don't necessarily handle brilliantly, but I think there's a lot to be said for that old style control setup, because I think with modern digital cameras, you've got program AE, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual modes. All of them kind of disconnect you to some degree from what your shutter speed and aperture and ISO are doing. And the more I use cameras and the more photographs I take, the more I'm starting to feel that this should actually be first and foremost in how you operate the camera, not something you leave the camera to work out for itself. So
So
yeah,
that's interesting on its own, because the let's just give it an example. Obviously, this is not the latest ZF, but ZFC, but it's based virtually the identical kind of operations there. You got the shutter speed style, you got the drive mode, and also the ISO dials. Everything's on top plate, so it's definitely feels more like you're operating an old menu camera, which is something that I personally prefer, because you can quite easily look down the camera and know your exact exposure triangles. You know your settings, everything's right there in front of you. You don't have to go through the menus, look at the back screen or the EVF. Better still, if the lens itself has an aperture ring, so basically you are having that full triangle right in front of you. You don't have to look anywhere else. You don't have to look at the top, dig into a little bit more into look at the small text in the EVS. So there's something that annoys me sometimes. You have to go through and look at it, and not intuitive enough for me to operate quickly. But with everything on top, I think that's certainly very nice. But one thing I think I also agree with you about the handling side is the this one I added the small rig grip, which is the same thing that the ZF also talked about. Now the launching offer is that they include the grip if you pre-ordered. But this one I bought separately just to put on the pen app, just simply because if I don't have this, it's slippery. It's just very boxy. It just doesn't hold well. But with just a little bit of grip there, it's starting to transform the whole kind of handling thing. I think it does work very, very well. Then this goes back to the whole retro styling thing now. And a lot of the older camera, if you look back into the history, whether it's going to be Pentax, MX, ME, look at the Canon AE1, A1, and all these old style camera, they follow the same box design. There's virtually no grip on it. So so if you got if you having a pair of gloves wearing them, and then you find that you're quite hard to hold on to them securely. And similarly, if you're in the wet, and it's just not very safe or secure. It's not my thing. I think that maybe we grew up with a lot of the big DSLR with proper grip on it. So we have the security when we hold the camera. But with a lot of these boxer designs that are now kind of coming back in fashion now, and even the Nikon is willing to offer the grip as a pre-order. That shows, it's almost like a necessity in a way. Okay, you may want to take the grip off just to have a bit of a fun styling factors there, but when it comes to actual operating it, you may still want to install the grip to have a proper handhold into the camera.
Yeah, I did get the add-on grip for my EM5 III, and it did make a big difference. I mean, it seems silly, you're kind of throwing away.
I think,
and I still don't particularly like the handling of the EM5 III or the OM5, which is essentially the same camera.
Right.
For that reason. So I'm not really a compact camera sort of person.
Yeah, well, yes, but then again, everyone seems to be like Also, apart from the styling, they also want it smaller. Full frame body is getting smaller, and they're all having this boxy kind of look as well. And so is Fuji and all the other people. EM5 itself is actually, or the OM5, also quite small on its own. Just like right here, that's the OM5, and so I kind of like that. I kind of like what OM system or Olympus did for the body, because even though it's boxy retro, but it's still kind of incorporating a small grip, and then so it seemed to work very, very well in terms of handling. So I kind of like the how the OM5 or the EM5 shape in terms of the body, while maintaining kind of retro styling on its own. But the likes of ZFC and is definitely take even a step further, trying to go even more retro and almost entirely following the FM series film camera. So I think there is good and there are bad as well. And I personally still would like to have a grip, just to hold it properly. So if you have a slightly bigger lens, and although I don't think you're supposed to use this for wildlife, having like a 500mm lens on it. So I wouldn't expect anyone who use this type of camera will have big lenses on anyway. However, if you do use the new Nikon, the 13518, that's a big, massive, heavy lens. So if you use one of those, I don't think you can operate professionally without a grip at all. So you definitely need something for that. So that's my kind of 2 cents in terms of styling, and also the likes of Leica, for instance. Leica never really changed the styling at all. They're still following the same M3, which is back in the 1950s. So the design is exactly the same. Even the latest M11, for instance. That again, there's no grip, and it's very slippery. And even though that this does feel a little bit rubbery, so it may be okay. But then again, it's not entirely secure. You can get an additional grip for the Leica M. But then again, a lot of Leica users tend to hate that because it destroys the aesthetic of the whole kind of M look. So that may not be an ideal situation for a lot of M user. So I think Rod has some connection problem that he's dropping in and out at the moment, and hopefully the internet will be resolved by itself. So let me just, before I continue, and hopefully waiting for Rod at the moment, is that asking you guys, how do you think about all these retro-looking cameras? Do you think it is coming back for that's the first thing. Second thing is that, would you like to have your next camera being a retro camera rather than going for the modern look, like the Sony or the Canon R series, or the OM1 or the G9 Mark II, that kind of boxy, futuristic look, the more minimalistic look, rather than going back to old school style, having actual dials on the top plates and things like that. So I'd like to hear from you guys, and just to see whether what your preferences are, because I think Nikon must have done a lot of research. The ZFC has proven to be fairly popular and also successful. That's why they bring out a full frame version of it. And we all know that the Olympus EM10 and also the EM5 series was selling really, really well in Asian markets, because they also like that kind of look and that kind of aesthetics overall. So this is certainly something is quite interesting, simply because I think the retro market is definitely taking a comeback. We're gonna have to see if the rumored Canon retro camera may come at some point to rival the Nikon ZF. You never know. It's only a rumor, so that could happen. But your take, your opinion, to let us know whether you would like to have a retro camera, in the future at some point, or if you are a pure photographer, because that's another thing. If you're a pure photographer, like the purity that you get from this kind of camera is unrivaled, because that does take you back, like Rod said, the old way, the original way of operating a camera, where everything's on top of it. You don't have to go through the back dial, the back front, you turn the front and back dials to change something, because everything is just right. You just turn it and you see it straight away what shutter speed you are, what ISO you are, and if you got an aperture ring, you know exactly what aperture you are at the same time. That's no fuss. It's right there in front of you. So let's see if there's something called XT. Yeah, XT is the same thing, right? Fujifilm is also very, very similar in terms of operation and styling, and certainly something that I think Rod will probably have more experience in Fujifilm cameras. I haven't, and because I had tried them many times, so I just haven't had a proper use of the Fujifilm cameras. Rod, how are you? You seem to be going in and out for some reasons.
Uh, so the the screen keeps freezing for me. I don't know what's going on. If it happens again, I might just quit my browser altogether.
Yep.
And in case Chrome is having a funny turn, it wouldn't be the first time. But I'll keep going regardless. What was your question? Sorry, Jimmy.
No. I simply asked the audience to see whether they would like to
Yeah,
have a retro camera in the future, because I personally feel that that seems to be the trend that's been pushing forward now, and a lot of people are definitely looking at retro cameras, definitely looking at
yeah,
not necessarily Nikon or OM5, but they want something that feels a bit
yeah,
old school, and I feel that's definitely something's happening. May not be over mainstream yet, and then Nikon is the first big name to actually offer something massive in terms of a camera. And if Canon does release the rumor retro looking A1 whatever AE1 kind of styling mirrorless cameras, so a full frame housing in a retro body, still then that will be a proper announcement saying that retro is back. And I can see that kind of happening. And if Nikon ZF is proven to be ultra successful for the company, and I could see that other company will be having a second thought now. Shall we push on with this retro thing? But then again, if you look at all the camera manufacturers right now, and the only companies that have a bit of a heritage that when it comes to SLR developments in the past, in the 60s and 70s, there aren't many nowadays. Minolta's gone now. It's Sony, but Sony definitely would not resurrect Minolta because that's not their brand right now, right? And that's not their focus. They want the Alpha series, and so they won't do it. And then again, Fujifilm has it, even though the Fujifilm mainly really just doing a lot of medium format cameras in the past, not necessarily 35mm. I know they had some, but wasn't really something that I would say pretty or successful. And we got Olympus, but now it's OM system. So now they had a little bit of heritage back in the days. Canon definitely had a lot of these old style SLR developments in the past, so they can resurrect some of those styling infused into modern design. And Pentax, that's an interesting thing now. Let's talk a little bit about Pentax, because I find it quite interesting when I come to think of it. I know they haven't really fully gone mirrorless, so they're still stuck in this SLR development. But if they are going to release something old school, like go back to the ME, the MX, these are iconic SLRs that rivals, the A1, the OM1, back in the days. And those are pretty cameras. They're really nice looking cameras. Wouldn't that be the perfect timing for Pentax to release a mirrorless cameras, but in those styling? Because the only way to shrink the size into that kind of, old SLR kind of proportions, that you have to go mirrors, because you can't incorporate mirror box and trying to keep the body thin. You can't. It just physically can't do it. And so, what's your take on it? Do you think Pentax would potentially do something?
I worry that Pentax doesn't really have the will or the resources to do that. But I would love a digital version of the K1000, which was
Ah,
the favorite camera for film photography students for years and years and years. I'd
yep,
love a digital version of the MX, which I used
yeah,
to shoot with. I think you're right. It would have to be mirrorless, and even though I like optical viewfinders, I think I would have to concede that mirrorless would be very much better. It's better for manual focusing, if
yep,
nothing else. Even with the big optical viewfinders on old SLRs, focusing was not terribly precise. You used to have to kind of go in and out and try and figure out a middle point where the image was likely to be sharpest. And you had focusing aids like micro prisms and split
yep,
image rangefinders, but they only worked if you were shooting with a lens of like an f2.8 or faster. So
yep.
if you bought a zoom, which were catching on in those days, then good luck to you, because they just wouldn't really work. So yeah, I think a mirrorless manual film SLR style camera would be wonderful. It wouldn't have to do anything particularly clever at all. you
No.
can make it. You can make it with 10-year-old technology, and it
Yeah.
would do the job perfectly well. So I would like to see it, but sadly, I'm not sure we're going to see it from
No.
Pentax.
No. Well, let's keep the hopes open. You never know. And
I, I think as well. I think as well. A lot of camera makers have burned their boats really by ditching the aperture ring on lenses. So Nikon did it, Canon did it, Pentax has done it. It's going to be hard to bring that back, and that seems to be central to this whole
you
kind of
you
retro
think
style of operation.
well you think so because but the thing is, like if TT Artisan managed to figure it out, to launch a lens with aperturing, actually working aperturing on a
Yeah,
Nikon
yeah.
camera. I can't see that. I can't see why they can't, let's say,
Well,
open up a new line, for instance, like a retro line that goes with the. You don't have to have a lot of lenses because you still can use other lenses.
well.
But then let's say have a trinity like 24, 35, and 50, 1.8. You don't even need ultra fast aperture, but rehouse with the same
So
optical formula.
Sony seems to manage perfectly well reintroducing lenses with aperture rings. If only they put shutter speed dials on top of the camera and ISO dials, we'd be there. So the trouble is there is no single camera that has all three of these things: an aperture ring, shutter speed dial, and
No.
ISO dial outside of Fujifilm.
Yeah.
But this isn't just nostalgia. I think it's a very interesting point, and I just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think a lot of the time we're no longer paying proper attention to settings that are actually quite important. So we just pick a mode and fire away, leave it to the camera, and whatever it does is probably going to be all right. But
Yeah.
we're kind of taking our eye off the ball. I think we're trusting too much of the camera, and we're losing a lot of the skills we used to have.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that we have kind of touched base on that point in multiple times in throughout our chat series,
Hundreds.
and we kept saying, like modern technologies, all these AI trackings and fascinating pro capture and all the other things are there to help you get more accurate shots, but not necessarily take away that you still have to learn the basics and when to execute the shots, because you still have to learn how to anticipate a moment as a photographer, how to storytell, how to frame, how to expose. All these stuff are still skills that you cannot get away with. I know you can kind of set everything to auto now, auto ISO, auto this, auto that, and human eyeball checking. Like you have a lot of stuff now, but that really, in a way, to me, that sometimes it actually is a distraction to photographer because there are so many things you have to enable and configure to suit a particular style of photography that you're trying to do. But by the time you set that all up, things might have gone, and then so I think a lot of times that as a photographer is that you can't take away the basic skills that you need to master or you have possessed, and not to forget it and trying to rely too much on technologies. They're there for you to help you get better shots for sure, but then not necessarily that will get you great shots, because technology is one thing, having the skills and experience is another thing. And I'm certain that any great masters photographers can operate a 50-year-old SLR, it can still able to capture some great shots. Yeah, may not be as accurate, as modern photography, digital cameras, because the technology is certainly different there. But the way I'm trying to say is, critical sharpness is not necessarily something that a photographer is always gunning for. It's all about context, the stories, and the content within the frame itself, more than just the pure sharpness.
I think another issue is that the current technology race, particularly with autofocus and fast lenses, it's driving the market away from certain styles of photography. So whatever happened to depth of field and zone focusing?
Yep.
What we're being invited to buy now are cameras that can instantly focus with very sharp plane of focus on one particular subject. But a lot of styles of photography need a zone of sharpness. They need, depth of field is a complex thing. But
Yep.
in street photography, for example, you don't want to hope that you can figure out an AF mode
Yep.
that will automatically find the right subject and focus on them in a fraction of a second you have available. What you probably want is a camera where you can switch it to manual focus,
Yeah,
set it to f8, and just pick a rough focus distance, and not have to worry about focusing at all. This is what I mean. We're losing our sense of depth of field
absolutely.
and focus control.
And perhaps even more,
yeah,
in more broader terms, the understanding of depth of field, because people don't
yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
associate depth of field is something. When we mention depth of field, people always suddenly think about its bokeh. You know, like this.
Yeah,
That's something a lot of modern photographers think of now. If I ask the audience a little questions here, you know, how many of you can actually read the distance scales on the lens? And then because a lot of people has asked me before, and I also see some other videos, people were asking what are those numbers? You know, they don't understand all these little numbers on the lens. What are they? And because they, you know,
very
this
good
is
point.
important information. You know that you can basically do what Rod just told you. You know, and you can set it to a zone that is basically. Have a perceived sharpness that is sharp enough for you to say, okay, that looks clear. And if you go outside of that zone, you know, it's something slightly becoming blur. This is something that we used to do a lot in the street photography when you go outside having a film camera. And that's why a lot of street photographers in the past, they would, you know, set it to f8. You know, they do zone focus, so they don't have to think too much or trying to use a lot of time in focusing the lens. You know that you know, you take away the moments that you're trying to capture, because in street photography you need to capture the decisive moment, right? So if you miss it, you miss it. And even in autofocus, even though you think that no matter how fast they are, there is still a time hesitance there. You know, like it's not something that you can go straight there and take the shot. So if you zone focus something, it's literally the delay. The only delay time is literally your human delay. You know, your actual the time it takes you to press the button. But apart from that, it's almost instantaneous.
So, and another thing is, say you're doing a classic bit of street photography, which is all about juxtaposition.
Yep.
You've got an elderly person pushing a trolley in front of a glamorous fashion poster, for example. Do you want the human sharp? Do you want the poster sharp? Or do you actually want them both sharp? Because if you want them both sharp, you're going to have to figure out how to use depth of field and zone focusing. And that's something that modern cameras just don't do. So your lens you're holding up, Jimmy, I've got one very much like it. So if I've got this, well, no, same principle. So if I've got this little Laowa lens, probably not going to be able to see it very well. But if I want to zone focus, I've got a depth of field marker for f5.6, let's say, and I can turn the focus ring. I'll do it in just a moment, then hold it up. You might not be able to see that, but the focus ring I've lined up infinity with the f5.6 marker. Then if I look at the other f5.6 marker, the other side, it tells me that it should be sharp down to about 0.4 of a meter. So now I know, so I can just stick this on f5.6, use that focus distance. I don't have to worry about focus at all. Yeah. So I don't need AI AF because I can work it out with some little markings on the lens.
And another thing that I think a lot of I wouldn't necessarily say anyone who's listening right now, but a lot of misconceptions about shallow depth of field photography is that they overused it, and then to the point that I think that they missed the point of actually how important surrounding environments can be in certain type of photography. I mean, street photography, of course, you know, but there are also contextual stuff like environmental portraits. All the other stuff needs to involve the surroundings to be able to tell exactly who this person is. And so, you know, shallow depth of field, I would say, it's a style of photography. It's a genre of photography. I wouldn't necessarily say that, you know, it's for every portrait, for every scenarios, because I know there are some people, when they buy a 0.95 lens or 1.4 lenses, they would naturally think that, I mean, I paid that sort of money, I'm gonna have to maximize my investment by keep shooting at those aperture, because that, you know, that's why I buy the lens for. You know, if you look at a lot of the older masters, you know, a lot of the Steve McCurry's and like even going even further back, and you look at a lot of these photographers, they may have 1.4 lenses, but how often do they shoot 1.4? They only shoot it for exposure. Think about it. They don't think about depth of field. They think about exposure. They need the speed. They need the light for the film to expose correctly. Not necessarily they're thinking about effects, how it creates the shot. And in daylight they would do zone focus, have the f8, f11 to do a shot. But when it's starting to dim, if they only have an 800 speed film, they will have to start and open up. To f2, f1.8, 1.4. If they have a f1 lens, they will open the f1, not for the depth of field, but for the light. And so the way older photographer thinks compared to modern photographer thinks is totally different thing now. We now think about, how shallow the depth of field can be if I shoot f1, 1.4. And they don't think about a lot of stuff simply because we can now push the camera so much more compared to older cameras. In the 50s and 60s, they only go up to one thousandth of a second shutter speed. They don't go faster than that. And then and film speed is another limitation there. Film speed are also very, very, very limited. You may have some slow film like 25 ISO films, but then again, the higher the higher ISO stuff, color film can go up to 800. Only until the 60, 70, you're starting to see 1600 films in colors. Black and white, you have to push. You can get 1600 film, but they can push 2 stops to get 6400. But then, you get the gist of it. So it's a very, very different thing altogether. But now we can shoot ISO 25,600, 102,400. These are extreme numbers, that you're talking about now. And then you got electronic shutter, then go up to 125,000. No, was it 25,000? 12,000 something. It's really fast shutter speed now anyway.
Further. 32,000, I think, on some Fuji films, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the way we shoot now is very, very different to the old days. And I can understand style has changed. Maybe photography has moved on a bit. But then again, we're going to go back to the whole retro thing now. I think in a way it's good that these sort of camera now coming back in a way, because it does give you a little bit of thinking, how you should approach photography. Not necessarily have to shoot everything wide open. With some limitations, always give you a little bit of a benefit in terms of training as a photographer. You got something limited. You can't expose certain things at that sort of shutter speed anymore. Everything is limited, especially like I said in the ZFC, it's only limited to 1/4000. Both mechanical and digital. That means if you want to shoot anything faster, you have to put the ND filters on, and otherwise you just have to do what we used to do in the old days. Stop down the lens. You can't, if you can't shoot 1.4, you can't shoot 1.4. You just have to stop down to 5.6.
Yeah. I think the style of photography has changed. Can I just do a quick shout out to Paul Genge? Hello.
Yes,
nice
I saw Paul Genge's name popped up.
Nice to seeing you here. You're very welcome anyway. So I guess, I've lost my train of thought now. We were talking about lens apertures, faster lenses, AI, AF, and all the focus speeds. Do you think we're becoming obsessed with what's difficult rather than what makes a good photograph? Do you think we're getting obsessed with the technology and completely forgetting that we're here to take engaging photographs? So we get very worried if a new camera goes up to ISO, is it 409, 600 and not, it's 204, whatever. So we think, oh no, that's my camera's a stop slower than the new one, but it's at an ISO setting you just wouldn't use anyway.
No.
And I think we all get very worried if let's say we bought a Sony A7R4 and then the A7R5 comes along with an AI processor, we think, oh no, what have I done? I've got the wrong camera. How many times do you actually need that AI focusing? It seems to me that we and camera makers are becoming obsessed with those last little corners of the performance envelope that really we're not likely to use.
I think there are two things that we can look at there. Technology is one thing, and definitely we not only the manufacturers themselves are obsessed, and obviously the end users are also obsessed about them as well. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's kind of how push the technology forward. I can see that, and it's certainly helpful for those who understand and experience in photography, because for those who do, these are pretty good useful tools, because like it helps you track the eyes, you make sure that your shots are sharp, and things like that. That's certainly very helpful. But let's go back to the early discussions that, if you're a wildlife photographer, if you let's say you're photographing a bear, in a wild, and having animal tracking and focus is cool, because it recognizes it, it tracks it no matter which way it goes, and that's certainly a very useful tool. But still, you can't just take a great photograph without understanding the bear's behavior, the natural habitat, how they behave in certain seasons, certain things. If you want to take a great shot of the bear, you have to understand a lot of stuff outside of the actual photography envelope. So this is still some sort of knowledge, experience, and skills that I mentioned earlier that you still have to accumulate over time. That something technology can't give you. So that is something that you have to bear that in mind. You're buying a camera, with all this fantastic tracking recognition software, AI thing that you can have in the camera, doesn't necessarily will give you the advantage when you compare to a photographer who are so experienced in these bears operating a 12-year-old camera without any tracking capabilities.
And what's this two bears? What's this two bears? You've got to think. So do I want them both in focus? Now I'm going to have to think about the aperture, focus in between them. You will then have to do things that AI can't help you with. Yep. So if you lose those skills, there's still going to be times when you end up in a bit of a hole, because AI, AF, and subject tracking and fast lenses, they'll focus on one thing. They can't focus on two things because they don't know which you want. No. And they don't really have the capability to focus between them automatically and choose the right aperture. Cameras used to do that. Anyone remember the Canon DSLR A-DEP mode, which used the focus points to work out what was closest, what was furthest away.
Yeah.
And then it would automatically pick a focus distance and an aperture to get them both sharp. Now, I suspect there are quite a few photographers who would happily swap AI subject recognition for something so obviously useful, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Yes,
which is strange.
And then I think the second point you also mentioned about is that would that make you lazy, and all this technology stuff, and I think they do. And especially, again, if you're not experienced in the field and you bought the camera simply for the technology itself, it may make you a lazier photographer over time, simply because you are starting to you bought it for that feature, so you're relying on the feature. You're not necessarily going to try and exploit it by learning more about how that would maximize the chances or the getting a better shot, for instance. It's another thing about how camera companies market their product as well, and that's something I think they have some to blame. And
it's all their fault.
Yeah, it's for instance, like I just use Sony for example, because I just recently saw their advertisement about the Sony Alpha cameras. They sort of now have a portrait mode, whatever, and so it automatically choosing the largest aperture setting you can have in the lens. So basically, reducing the depth of field, so having a slightly shallower depth of field as a result. So it gives you subject isolation. But they're using this very easy to understand marketing term, which is no bad thing, for the people who don't understand it. But then again, if you think about portrait mode all the time on the camera, I'm not talking about phones, but I'll talk about camera. So if you see a person, you take it to portrait mode. So you're starting to become lazy now. Okay, I'll just switch it on, have no understanding of depth of field, have no understanding of aperture, what it does, and it's just relying on that all the time. And so I don't think you will learn anything from it. I don't think that you will actually understand. That didn't happen in the past, right? We don't have this portrait mode. We don't have this mode, that mode. Everything that's very, very basic. All we had were just dials and a very thin menu that only tells you, like what shutter speed you do. Do you still remember the old Canon menus that they always come with the camera? They have these pages, yeah, talk about shutter speed. You know, like you get a blur shot if you go the shutter speed go too slow, and the aperture. You know, when you got focus. They talked about zone focus in the old menu.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore. You know, like this is actually, I think it's quite educational.
I think there's a lot of marketing trickery going on. The one of the principles of marketing is that you try and identify a problem, then you exaggerate it, then you sell a solution. So I think that that's kind of what's happening with portrait mode. So
Yep.
makers will say, oh my word, oh, aperture, oh, that's so difficult and complicated, people won't understand that, call it portrait mode. So it really is only just something wide aperture, but you've called it something simple, and then you've managed to convince people that this is an additional thing that they didn't have before. Well, it's not. It's not. It's just made something they had already sound
Yep.
simpler. So it seems to me it's quite a small step from being lazy to being helpless, because you might start off saying, oh, I can't be bothered to focus on the eye, I'll let the camera do it.
Yep.
And a little further down the line, you or somebody like you might say, oh, I want to focus on the eye, but I don't know how to do it. Thankfully, my camera does. So
Yep.
suddenly you stop knowing what to do, and you have to get the camera to do it, which doesn't seem much of a, it doesn't seem an ideal progression in photographic skill and knowledge, does it?
No.
And the other frustrating thing is if makers have always tried to make quite ordinary technical things sound incredibly difficult, but you would only have to pick up a camera with an adjustable lens aperture and some kind of depth of field preview mechanism and turn the dial, and
Yep.
you'd say, oh, I get it. And then you don't need a portrait mode because you understand the principle, and you can just do it. Oh,
Yeah.
God, it's so
But
annoying now.
you know, I think that that's something also like some of the older SLRs are actually better in a way, because the, you know, like if you have an aperture ring on the lens, and that actually mechanical, not digitally connected.
Yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
know what, let me just open this up so you can actually see what's happening there. So like you can actually physically see the aperture closing, and so when you look through an old SLR cameras, oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then so when you look through the viewfinder, through the SLR, old SLR I'm talking about, has no electronic connections or anything. So the aperture is completely self-isolated from the camera operation. So when you want to control the aperture, you have to turn the actual aperture ring on the lens itself. But this is actually quite helpful in a way that when you look through the viewfinder, you can see the depth of field changes when you stop down. You know, like because modern even DSLRs or SLR, not even DSLR now, they seem to open up so you can see through the viewfinder, because it gives you more light in, so you can see better. But that doesn't give you the depth of field preview. Although certain cameras does have that button for you to kind of press it and you kind of close down, you can check the depth of field yourself. Some more mirrorless camera does have that feature, but not all of them have it. But that really confuses a lot of people when they don't understand what aperture
I think
does.
so. In a sense, I don't think SLRs help very much, because all the makers swapped to full aperture metering and viewing because you needed a bright viewfinder image.
Yep.
So the lens would only stop down at the moment of exposure. So you could turn the aperture ring all you like, and it'll stay wide open until you take the picture, which is why you needed a depth of field preview. At which point the screen would go practically dark and you couldn't see anything anyway. But it actually works incredibly well with the mirrorless camera. So if you've got, say, like a Sony mirrorless body, and you use an adapter to fit an old manual lens with no connections, all your viewing and metering is done in stop down mode. So whatever aperture you set the lens to, that's the aperture the camera sees. So you could just put one of these old retro lenses on your Sony body, and probably others for all I know, turn the aperture ring, and immediately you get a sense of what the depth of field is doing. And because the viewfinders are electronic with automatic gain, you don't get the darkening effect. You can just turn the ring and you think, oh, shallow depth of field, oh, really deep depth of field. and you get it straight away. So in a curious roundabout sort of way, modern mirrorless cameras are actually quite a bit better than old cameras at doing these old school things.
Well, yes, in that sense, definitely. And also, another thing about modern digital camera is when you stuck a lens on, even with electronics, uh, uh, lenses, especially brighter lenses like 1.4, 1.8, even like 1.2 lenses. If you put it on, if you're on a bright daylight, you actually do notice that they close down the aperture quite a bit because just to avoid actually burning the sensor with those lights in it.
Yeah, it's
Don't forget,
interesting, isn't it?
for mirrorless, the sensor is always open because that's how it works for the electronic viewfinder. So they will close it down. So if you have a very shallow depth of field scenarios where the lens, let's say, is a 50 millimeters in full frame, it has a 1.2 aperture. If you want to shoot 1.2, looking through the viewfinder, you set everything 1.2. This thing that is projecting through the little viewfinder doesn't actually represent the 1.2 because the lens actually closed down. So you don't necessarily know how shallow it is until you actually taken a shot. And because it's an auto protection mechanisms there in all digital mirrorless cameras, they're all closed down in bright daylights until you actually take the shot.
So that means you won't know till you look at it in playback, Jimmy.
Hey?
It's just like you won't know what your depth of field looks like until you look at the image in playback.
No, that's
Guys,
right.
it's like a DSLR, isn't it? Fancy that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. But I do think modern mirrorless cameras are actually quite good at this retro style of shooting. If only more of them had shutter speed dials, I think. That because shutter speed is important too. It's not just about camera shake. It's about subject movement and it's not even about freezing movement because quite often you don't want the movement frozen. You want to be able to choose how the movement looks.
It's the control of movement, whether you want to be like frozen or you want it to be extended. Like a lot of the panning shots in wildlife. Some of them we may want to like photograph a cheetah running. You want the background to be blurred to exaggerate the movement there, while the subject still like clear. So you do the panning, but you want it to be like a little bit blurred back, for the panning motions, and you need to have that just correct shutter speed. Sharp, fast enough to freeze, the subject, but slow enough to blur the background while you're panning. So, it's intricate skills there. Same as motor photography. People who photograph F1, all these Daytona cars, like going past panning, the same thing as well. And also something I completely forgot now.
If you're photographing soccer or athletics, for example, some photographers like to see just that tiny bit of movement in a ball. Otherwise, it just looks like a fixed tableau. And with athletics, sometimes they like to see the hands or the feet just with a tiny little bit of blur. Obviously the logo on the shirt and the face, they've got to be sharp, but just a little bit of blur at the extremities makes it look as if they're going fast. Getting the right shutter speed is important. And if you don't pay proper attention to it, you're going to lose these little subtleties. And I think with cameras that don't have external exposure controls, it's easy to get lazy and just not check and just assume it's going to be more or less all right. And you're losing that subtlety of control, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Well, that goes back to the whole conversation we just had now. Is about technologies making you lazy. IBIS is another thing. I know it's kind of slightly outside the topic here, but a lot of people think IBIS can do everything. To stabilize your cameras. Kind of make your shot always sharp, but not necessarily. I mean, it may stabilize your camera, but your shutter speed might be too fast or too slow. That then eventually still affect your outcome. In terms of like what type of photography you want to capture, and. IBIS, as good as it is, I don't think that people understand fully the effect of it or how you should be utilizing the IBIS for whatever photography you're trying to capture. For instance, the same thing that we actually just talked about, the panning shots, and some of these IBIS will have an option for you to select which axis to lock. So so you can do panning, so basically just going horizontally or vertically. You can actually lock one of those axes when it comes to IBIS. some just don't have that option, so it's always going to be on. For those type of for those type of IBIS system, that means you may not be as effective when it comes to certain type of photography, like stuff that we just talked about. So you have to be quite careful about understanding IBIS itself and how you use it, because remember, IBIS is trying to counteract any movement in the camera. So if you don't want to do a panning movement, the the moment you're trying to move the camera, the system will try to counteract it. So you always get the delay time there. So that means that you may not necessarily actually have the quick reaction when you're doing panning left and right to get the moment, to get the motion you want, because the system will mess it all up for you.
That is quite true. Can I just answer a question from Andrew about Andrew
Sure.
Banner about non-native lenses with an adapter?
Yep.
Adapters don't change a focal length because they're moving a lens away from the sensor like an extension tube. Adapters work only where you have a camera where the flange to sensor distance is shorter than the lens is made for. So you can put DSLR lenses on a mirrorless camera because the space for the adapter and the lens will still focus on infinity. You can't do it the other way around. You can't put a mirrorless lens on a DSLR because it will always be too far away from the sensor. So it kind of only works in one particular direction. But luckily, most older vintage or retro lenses are made with a much longer flange distance, so you can almost always get an adapter to use them on a mirrorless camera. And when you do that, they still focus on infinity. The focal length doesn't change. Everything works exactly as it should. So, in the sense of using vintage lenses via adapters, nothing changes. They still work as they should. There's another point being made in the chat about micro four thirds and the crop factor. That's perfectly true. That's not really connected though with using old lenses and adapters. But I do think it's very interesting that mirrorless cameras are very good at handling vintage lenses. They've kind of brought them back, which is probably why we're having this conversation, because you can buy a dumb adapter for your mirrorless camera and suddenly fit all those lenses you've had in your cupboard for the past 20 or 30 years you never got around to putting on eBay, and suddenly you can use them all again. It's actually quite cool.
and also experiment. Like you might have seen them. The people starting to adopt some of those old CCTV lenses. All those old cine camera lenses where they're made for like much smaller negatives, and then but on a micro four third, you just put a slightly spacer or adapter, if you want to call it, and it just plunk it on, and it just works straight away, and everything just works just fine. It does focus well, focus infinity, and it's a lot of people are starting to experiment those stuff as well. And I think micro four third is quite good in a way because it's got such a short flange distance from the sensor to the actual mount itself. You can literally use any lenses on it. I know there's a crop factor involved, but then you can mount anything on it. Full frame is slightly wider, slightly deeper. The flanges, and may not be able to adapt as many lenses like the micro four third does, but still allows you quite a handful. Yeah,
I think I looked into it when I was shooting with Sony, and you can get I think even with full frame mirrorless cameras, the flange distance is very much shorter than classic vintage lenses. You can fit anything to anything. You lose all the electronics, so you need a lens with a manual focus ring and manual aperture control.
yes.
So like an old dumb lens, if you like, but they actually work the best. It's where you've got complicated electrical connections with, for example, electronic diaphragm control. That's not going to work well because you're then into much more expensive and specialist territory. But any old dumb lenses with mechanical controls, they work brilliantly. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like old manual lenses, you can get an adapter, any adapter for like £10, £15 on Amazon. But the electronic ones that usually cost about £300 to £400, almost as much as a camera itself.
Jamie, could I get an adapter to fit Pentax M42 or Pentax K bayonet onto MFT?
Yes, you can.
Interesting.
Yes, you can. You can get M42. You can get you can get M39.
Yeah,
Or fit. Yeah, I mean they're screw mounts, so they're quite easy to find. And
yeah.
the K mount is actually a bit more niche because
Mm,
there aren't many people actually using Pentec lenses. But you can find them. I mean, I even have some of those FD to Micro Four Third, FD to Leica mount. The FD lenses where the aperture ring, you need a special mechanism to control the actual aperture ring.
yeah,
So even though it's on the lens, but you need to have a switch at the back,
right,
to enable
right.
the connections there.
To enables, yeah.
So you do need a special adapter. Those will be slightly more, but still talk about like 30, 40 pounds, not extortionate.
So I've got some quite nice old lenses from my film cameras. The cameras themselves don't work so well anymore, especially those with cloth shutters, but the lens is still good. So I've got an old Pentacon 50mm 1.8, which was a cheap kit lens for practicas back in the day. Don't know if anyone remembers those. That'd be quite cool to try on a mirrorless camera,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
especially on MFT. That'd give me a
A nice
100.
portrait, yeah.
I'd be 100mm f1.8. It's probably got a very nice look for portraits too, wide open. So I'm sure it's not going to be it's not going to have a lot of contrast and resolution wide open. But that
Yeah,
could
well,
be interesting.
I have one of those old Russian lens, the 44mm 1.8 Helio,
Oh
and
yes, yeah,
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 they're M42, so like
yeah,
they were adapted to Micro Four Third, very low contrast lens, wide open, but that
yeah,
you do
yeah,
get that very
yeah.
special look in it, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think that that's just one thing that certainly the mirrorless cameras has brought back, in terms of retro styling, retro looking images, simply because you can use some of these older lenses, and a lot of these characters from these old lenses cannot be manipulated using digital manipulations, film simulation, for instance. Film simulation only changes the color tones and certain contrast levels and whatnot, those kind of thing. But if you want it like very old school looking images, like you talk about rendering, you talk about like how a lens actually draws the pictures, that you can't do anything apart from an old lens. So you have to get those old vintage lenses that but a lot of them are quite cheap nowadays, and like what Rod just said, get Pentacon lenses, get the Helio lenses. These are literally dirt cheap on eBay, so you can just pick one up. And yeah, and the thing is, these lenses, they last forever. They're made with metal.
Yeah.
They're just simple construction. You can service the lens yourself if you really want to.
And also tell me if I'm wrong about this on MFT, but from using vintage lenses on Sony bodies, it's a myth to imagine you always have to be in manual. You don't. You can just put the camera into aperture mode or even program mode. It just bases the exposure on the light coming through the lens, which is whatever the aperture setting you've chosen. You can use these vintage lenses in automatic mode.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be in manual. They are very quick to use. All you have to remember is to focus. And the thing as well with the mirrorless is that you can punch in and magnify the image to focus precisely in a way you never could with the DSLR.
Yeah. The only thing about using manual lenses on modern digital cameras apart from manual mode, if you're looking at shutter speed mode or aperture priority modes, these two modes will become exactly identical because the aperture is controlled on the lens, not on the camera. So the camera will just decide what sort of shutter speed it needs to expose based on the aperture size you selected on the lens. Nothing more, nothing less. So those two modes become exactly the same thing. If you choose shutter speed, shutter priority, or aperture, it will give you the same figures, same exposure every single time.
So yeah, that's quite true. You're going to lose shutter priority mode because the camera's got no way of controlling the lens, and in program mode, it's effectively aperture priority because again the camera can't control the shutter speed. Can't control the aperture. So yeah, effectively you lose shutter priority, and half the effect in is the program, but you still get aperture priority auto exposure, which is often enough.
And you can still do semi-auto by means of you can still do exposure compensation just by dialing up and down. All those still works, which is actually a lot of fun. And, so you guys should give it a try for sure. And now let's talk a little bit about my favorite topics, and I've run a poll just a few days ago, talking about the whether OM systems should make another PEN F, and quite a few of you got very emotional and very very animated when I posted that, and they all suggested they should make another PEN F, and and then I furthered the question a little bit more. I said, like, what sort of prices would you be willing to pay for one of these guys here? And I just throw some figures out in the thin air. This is completely off the book. I'm not suggesting one is coming. I'm just saying, like, if one does, if OM system does decide to make a PEN F2, what sort of prices are you willing to pay? And so I put up three figures, $12.99, $13.99, and $15.99. I know it may sound a lot of money, but in fact, it's actually not a lot in today's terms. I'm trying to talk a little bit about that now, because a lot of you, when you look at the prices, quite a few of you are basically saying that it should have this, it should have that. But we are talking about a retro camera here, and just kind of like fit into the overall discussion today. I did say that earlier in the discussions that the OM system, or Olympus for that matter, in the last few years, and they have almost completely forgotten about this type of cameras that they literally single-handedly kick-started when the Micro Four Thirds came about, and as popular as they are, they somehow seems to be losing it completely, and then they don't think that this sort of thing sells. I know they have burned a finger with the PEN F, original PEN F, which surprisingly has come back in fashion. I think that they were just a little bit ahead of its time when Olympus launched the PEN F, because the market weren't ready for a premium version of a retro-looking camera. Everyone loved the PEN EPL series because they were quite affordable, comparatively. You can buy a PEN EP series EPL for £600, £600, £500. But the PEN F came out over $1,000. So people just suddenly have this shock. How can a pen would cost that much? But then now, if you go to some of the second-hand camera stores, you look at the prices of the likes of Fujifilm X100V, the version 5. I saw one the other day, literally 2 days ago. It's advertised used, used, £1,799, £1,800 for a second-hand X105. So, like,
nobody's got the stock, so it's driven by scarcity, really. If something goes out of stock, people panic and think, I'll pay any money. I'm so scared I won't get one.
But the thing is that it's a reflection also, like the and also in combination with the success of ZFC and the new ZF, by reaction. I mean, I don't know what sort of sales figures they got, but by reactions, people are definitely interested in a retro looking camera, and they definitely would pay literally anything for a retro looking camera, providing the technology is there.
Retro looking or retro control? This is going to be my question, because much as I love the PEN F, it's a retro looking camera. It's not a camera with retro controls, so it doesn't really meet my criteria.
It doesn't. It doesn't. However, you can kind of modify, by using manual lenses and make it one if you really want to. I know it doesn't have an ISO dial, it doesn't have a shutter speed dial, and but my main thing is, I think if OM system now reconsider a retro camera option to bring back a premium pen camera with stuff that we discussed, let's make it have dials just like the ZF, like the Fujifilm X series, have a lot of controls on top of it, making like a proper old school camera, but still have the same build, and quality of the original PEN F, plus obviously some upgrades.
What Nikon has done with the DF and with the ZF and the ZFC is quite clever. I don't think it's quite big enough, but they put this little panel on the top plate showing you the current aperture setting, which is halfway in my mind towards having an aperture ring. So it's all right. But what we've also lost in recent years has been the mono top plate,
If I
which
just
shows
kind of
you,
show that little window there, that's a little
yeah.
window there. Yeah. Although it
So
doesn't show anything because I haven't turned the camera on actually. And
we'll take your word for it. We trust you.
there we go. Is this showing anything? I think it's showing anything. Does it show? I don't know. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's a 2.8. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good, good.
It's flashing because it's underexposed because I got a cap on.
But the other thing we've lost is those big mono status panels on the top, and they would
Yeah.
show you your shutter speed and your lens aperture and your ISO. Not quite the same to my mind as a proper dial,
Like
but it's the
this.
next best thing. Yeah, and we've lost them.
And the G9 Mark II, how can they
I
just
know,
take that off?
I know,
How can they
I
take that off?
know.
They had it on the Mark 1. They just take that off of the Mark II, which
I mean,
everybody loved.
if you can't have physical rings,
Yep.
can we at least have a big status display where you know your front dial does your shutter speed and look, there it is, it's changed it, and the back dial does your aperture, oh look, it's changed it. That's the next best thing, really.
Yeah. So I guess, like, let's go back to a little bit of the PEN F2. And the question I asked is how much people were willing to pay. And the majority of them obviously would choose the lower figure. That's very understandable, like that $12.99. But even that, people were thinking it may be a little bit too expensive. It should be about $1,000. And but I personally think, like the PEN F1 when it first came out, I think it was $11.99 if I remember correctly, the RRP. So yeah, it's quite dear. But then you have to consider a lot of things there. It was the first 20 megapixel camera, even though it still have the contrast detect AF. It's not the hybrid AF that the EM1 has, but it was the first 20 megapixel camera. And then in terms of construction, I personally think that this was way better because someone was comparing this to the EM5 Mark II. And even though that camera was weather sealed, but in terms of construction, if you haven't actually hold one of these in your hand, the PEN F, you would not know how much more solid it feels compared to the EM5 Mark II. And I can guarantee that you have one side by side, you're trying to hold both camera, and you would notice the difference between the two, even though the PEN F is not weather sealed in terms of construction. But when you hold it side by side, yeah, you can definitely tell that this is. I would say that it gives you the impression it's more expensive, more premium, just by feeling it. And so if OM system does continue this tradition by not choosing a plastic shell, like the OM5 or the EM5 Mark III, continue using metal body, having it weather seal, having all the premium features thrown into it, it's not going to cost less, right? It has to cost more than the OM5, even if it's got the same guts. So I would suspect, like, if they're gonna do it, they're gonna do it as a premium option. I don't think they're gonna do it cheap. Otherwise it's gonna be another EP7, EP9, EP whatever. Just gonna be at the lower end, not in the premium end, and because of that, it's not justifiable to having the features that will match OM5 or the OM1 in terms of features and technologies. So then you're gonna go back to the same old equations again. They're gonna continue the same cheap end pen series, but we are still talking about a premium pen. So I just think that it could potentially be interesting to see how OM system think about what we said. If they're listening, and if they are listening to a lot of the users, that means that they know that the demand is there, but necessarily the market is ready again, depending on what sort of technology is going to throw into the body. The pricing is definitely one key factor there. But I personally would like one. Some people agree with me. No matter what the price is, they're still going to get one.
Yeah. I think I might slightly rephrase your poll question. Instead of saying to people, how much would you want to spend? I would say, what price would rule it out for you? Then you'll get an upper limit. That would be interesting. I mean, otherwise people are just going to say, oh, I'd like it to be $799 or whatever.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to know the pain point where people would say, no, I'm out. But the whole thing with the PEN F being discontinued, that's interesting. Did it cost too much to make? If it did, you can kind of understand. But if it didn't, you could just start making it again, and people would still buy it. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. Well, I guess, they quite a lot of even myself. I'm not fully into the whole engineering and also manufacturing side of it, but I do know certainly knows about the component size. In terms of the cost of them. Tooling is very expensive. So like if you create a new shape, so that means they need new tool, new molds for everything, and those are extremely expensive. So that's why all the camera manufacturers, when they introduce new cameras, they have this recommended retail price (RRP). So and they will keep the price at that certain level for a period of time, making sure the initial cost of R&Ds and these toolings are covered. Then they started to discount for going for the slightly larger market, and that will be the profit at the end. So like as much as you would think that camera companies are making a lot of money, I think the first 6 months of every model are literally covering the cost. They're not necessarily actually making money. And it's only after the first 6 months and they're starting to recoup, those costs and starting to make a little bit of money. And depending on how successful they are in terms of upgrading their firmwares and keeping the camera features modern and updated, and then the whole lifespan of 2 years. So it's actually a very small window when you start looking at it. So like for 2 years, 2.5 years for a camera model, you're looking at that particular camera only has about 18 months to make money. And if that doesn't sell a lot, you're losing money.
Yeah, I think out of fairness to the cameras do cost a lot to design. They cost a lot to tool up production lines for. And some of them cost quite a lot to make. I'm pretty sure that the PEN F cost quite a lot to make with its quality of construction, its materials, its hidden screws, and all the other things. It would have been an expensive camera to make. And I think, well, they are there, but you have to remove some panels to see them. That's what I was told. So you're going to need some special tools.
I don't want to. I don't want to take it apart.
Don't break it. Don't break it. But as far as the phase detector AF is concerned, I've used plenty of Olympus cameras with contrast AF for stills photography, and it's not been an issue. So I wouldn't get too worked up over that. I think that the PEN F is a perfectly usable camera today, but it'd be an incredibly difficult camera to market, because it doesn't shoot 4K video, it doesn't have AI AF, it doesn't have phase detector AF. Every kind of I'm trying to think of a less negative word, but every kind of current camera prejudice would be stacked against it. That's the problem. It's a very, very fine camera for stills photography, even today, even with the same tech as it always had. But the perception would be of a camera that was not up to the job, which seems to me just foolish.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it needs a little bit of education, I guess, for to showcase how you can maximize a camera with its basic features, because like we kind of have this whole conversation all day today now, and all this latest tech tracking recognition modes and everything. That's kind of get everybody excited when it comes to new cameras. Like even the ZF, the latest full frame ZF, it has the Z8 and Z9's processors, the 3D tracking capabilities, and all kinds of stuff. These may not be necessary, but it certainly sells the camera in a way that, oh wow, it has the flagship's AF system, it does have this tracking mode, it does have this and that, but it's still very much a lightweight, kind of retro looking camera that is not really necessarily tailored for sports shooting, not necessarily tailored for wildlife photography, not necessarily they're going to go to Antarctica and take the ZF over. You most likely going to take the Z9 instead because it's more rugged. So even though it has all these features as a selling point, it's not necessarily actually what this camera is made for. And so for people who may be using the ZF, ultimately will probably just taking some portrait, going around, taking some holiday shots and kind of thing. That would be more of its natural habitat. So the PEN F, once again, I mean, you can see the ergonomics and everything. This is not something that you're going to use a 40 to 150 2.8 zoom lens. You're not going to use a 300 f4 Pro lens. It's not going to have these massive big lenses on top of it. It's really gunning for small primes, 1.8, 1.4 lenses. They're not going to be something that you are going to take to shoot football, like things like that. So having like tracking this and tracking there, having this fast burst mode, this and that, is not necessarily something that the ultimate PEN F users is going to use. However, I agree with you. It's hard. It's going to be a hard sell without all these features, because people who are spending that sort of money will be looking, that's that money I can get an all-in-one. I can get this. We have all these features in it, but let's go back to the cost of manufacturing and the design and all the other stuff.
And the big Japanese camera manufacturers, they're extremely conservative. They don't tend to use wit or humor or kind of offbeat marketing very much. I mean, you would need a very offbeat marketing campaign for the PEN F2, or even if you started reselling some of the EPL9 cameras.
Yeah.
You would have to go seriously offbeat, and that would be a risk that most camera makers wouldn't take.
Yeah. If I just purely based on what's happening on social media these days, I mean, we can look at the both Instagram and also on YouTube. There are two very separate line of photographers out there, and one is the high-tech, high-octane photographers who basically looking for a camera that will do everything, like feature reach, anything you can throw at it. Then you get a bunch of photographers who are going for the basic of the basic, literally like nothing, anything more than AF is too much for them, and so like it's very, very divided bunch of photographers out there. And those people who use the X100, the Fujifilm or the ZF, are actually more those photographers who are looking for the basic stuff, not necessarily for the feature-rich guys. Even though some of these, the ZF, for instance, had the latest AF text in it, but then may not necessarily appeal to the people who are already looking at ZA, Z9, or Canon R1, all these A1 series, Sony, all these high-tech cameras. So it's going to be a very particular place now. This kind of retro thing. But I know it's popular. But how can it revive? For instance, or maybe even like convince OEM system to make something like this again, or the general the market as a whole to sell more of this camera to kind of revive the market in general, because we know that the figure's declining. No matter how you look at it. So yeah, it's interesting. I think there may be a chance if the pressures keep pushing that direction.
If you can get enough big influencers on board, then you could probably get enough momentum, because I think the manufacturers do listen to those, but the product lead times are really quite long. So if they decide today that they need to bring back a retro camera, it might be 2 or 3 years before it's available for sale.
So do you think, talk about lead time, that's interesting. That's a very interesting point there, because the retro craze started with the Fujifilm, the X Pro and X100 started about, I would say about 2.5 years ago. The ZFZ came out last year. So the lead time for this guy is about 18 months. But they would have started this before that. So that means they will have foresee or maybe anticipated this kind of retro thing coming back.
The gaps between products is not an indication of the development time, because you can be quite sure that when the ZFC was launched, the ZF was on the internal roadmap. It's like any new Sony camera. It didn't just appear because somebody saw a PowerPoint and they thought, oh, we'll make that next week, and they do. That's not how it works. Sony will have a roadmap, an internal development roadmap and product roadmap, where these things were probably known about 3 years ago. And what they're doing is they're deciding the right time to introduce them, I guess. Which kind of undermines my point about lead times. But if OM System was suddenly to be convinced that actually, we should go back to the retro thing, I think it's still looking about 2 or 3 years.
Oh yeah, minimum
If
for sure.
if they've decided this already, it could be tomorrow, but I don't think they have. Don't think they
No.
have.
Well,
But
with the transition from Olympus to OM systems, happening literally just about 2 years ago, and I think in terms of product roadmaps and stuff like that, it's still pretty much following the original Olympus roadmap. Pretty much, I would say. I wouldn't 100% confirm, but more or less, they're still following from the original design and timelines and everything. So any new products they may have, starting to think it may only probably just about happening last year, if not this year. So yeah, it's interesting to see how further they can go with this sort of retro thing.
It's almost as if companies get scared by their own innovation. So
It goes back. It goes back to my point.
Car industry. You see in the car industry, somebody comes up. Remember the first modern VW Beetle?
Yep.
That was very cool. It did actually look quite a lot like the old Beetles, but every version since then has been kind of watered down, diluted, been a bit more cautious, a bit more careful, and it's got so it looks almost like every other car. And I think in a way this seems to be happening with cameras. So Fujifilm went health leather with a retro style, and it's almost like they thought, oh, we're not selling enough cameras. We need to be like everybody else. And that's why that their particular USP, I think, is in danger of being lost. And I think Olympus and OM System have done this with the pens. They made something unique, and then they thought, oh, this is a bit niche. Suddenly we're feeling very scared. We'd better make cameras just the same as everybody else's. That's what worries me.
I always think, like fortune favors the bold. Like
it does. For sure.
When you talked about the car industry, like the Beatles, look at the likes of the BMW now owns Mini, right? The Mini brand.
Yeah.
So Mini has evolved. Mini has become modern. Mini has become a trend. Mini has becoming a car for everybody, because even though Mini is no longer Mini, it's quite big now, but then again, it has different kind of variation of the Mini that suits kind of different different personalities, different thing altogether. So like it's the same thing can apply to the pen. That's why Olympus made the original pen. Then they have the EP, they have the EP Mini, they have the EPL. They have a slight variation of the pen cameras. But I guess, like you said, I'm not sure whether they actually scared of the market that they created, but certainly they had single-handedly created this retro thing. First with the pen, and then the EM5, the original EM5 came out in 2012, and then that really kind of kick-started this whole retro SLR style body that everybody literally follow afterward. And they have created this market, and now they are almost like distancing themselves from that market that they created.
This is what I don't understand. Why create something unique, then run away from it?
Yeah,
that's why.
So I'm hoping they will return. I'm hoping there's something's in the work, that will surprise us in a good way. And so I'm really hoping, whether they're going to release this, or even better still, if the OM5 Mark II or the future OM5 is going to be a phenomenal retro-looking camera, maybe even with more control dials, I don't know, return to metal body, for instance, like just to make it more premium. Certainly, I think that sort of constructions, that sort of design will sell, because that's a lot of people are paying a lot of money for this sort of thing now. I know you can still say that, well, the OM5 still costs more than the ZFC, for instance. But you can't really compare these two here. I know one is APS-C sensor, but sensor sizes is only one thing. This guy can do way more than the ZFC can do. Even though, yes, they are both retro-looking camera, but then the OM5 has computational feature that the ZFC doesn't. And then the shutter speed, if you're a pure photographer, the shutter speed does go up all the way to 1/12,000th a second electronically and 1/8,000 mechanical, while the ZFC doesn't. This guy is plastic, and I know that guy is also plastic, but this is IP53 with a seal certified. This one doesn't. And I think overall, you may compare it, because they are similar looking. They one is bigger sensor. You might think that the ZFC is better value for that matter. I mean, I got the ZFC just because I like the retro look and also the operation. But in terms of features and actually the worth of it, the OM5 definitely worth a lot more because IBIS, for instance, ZFC also doesn't have. So these things does contribute to a lot of things that you can do, or what you can or cannot do in terms of photography and video. So yeah, it's certainly something to bear in mind when it comes to looking at camera from different formats, because it's not necessarily the same thing. And the ZF, we had a little bit of discussion with Rod earlier as well. The ZF is £2,400 in the UK, and currently, and it sounded like a lot of money, but it's actually, in terms of full frame cameras, it isn't actually that much. And I think that is pretty good value for money, to be, if you ask me. It's got IBIS, it's got the flagship AF system. It may only have 24 megapixel sensors, and it may not have the latest and the greatest sensor technology, but it does have everything else. So I think overall it's actually quite a neat little package.
Handle 1111. Is that enough ones? Brett just brought up the
RD.
I know. I had one for review for a while. That is an interesting experience. I've got a feeling that, I don't know the price, but I think it's a lot more than 2,400 at the time. So if anyone wants to know, this was like an alternative Leica. So it was a rangefinder camera. It's an APS-C rangefinder camera, and I think at that time the Leica models were only APS-C anyway. So it's like it was like a much more affordable Leica. The only issue is who's going to buy a camera made by a printer company. So I think they had some branding issues there. But if they could have found a better brand, it was a good camera.
The Epson RD is a phenomenal camera. And,
it is, yeah.
And you know what, yeah? We're talking about retro camera today, yeah? The RD is the king of retro camera. Let me tell you why. I mean, I love the camera.
I didn't know you'd use one.
Oh, that thing is classic. I know it hasn't got a full frame camera, full frame sensor, but the retro analog dials on top of the top plates, you know, it shows you the battery level, shows you the exposure, yeah. And when I say exposure, I'm talking about how many frames you got left, you know, the number counting thing and the top. And then it has a proper the manual crank, you know, for the
yeah.
You can't take the shot without cranking it first.
yeah. That's amazing.
Cool. That is cool. That is a proper retro. It's basically replacing the film with a digital sensor, and that's it. It's still a full-on manual camera.
Was it like a M mount?
It's M mount. It's M mount, so you can use M mount lenses on it.
Yeah.
And but it only has 35, 50, and I can't remember. They only had 3 focal lengths. So the frame line, only had 3 frame lines on it. And the thing is, because it's APS-C, it's been converted, so you have to use certain lenses on it. Yeah. And so it's a bit annoying in that sense. You know, I'm not sure anybody knows the Epson RD is actually body was based on the Voigtlander.
Of course it was. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I think if they have kept the Voigtlander branding, it might have sold a lot more. And I'm not entirely sure why they would go for the Epson brand. Like you said, a printer company, you know, suddenly launch a rangefinder camera.
It'd be like buying Lexmark lenses, wouldn't it? Who's going to do that?
Yeah, it's really, really weird. But during that time, and many of you may not know that when Leica lost the patent of the M mount, so there were quite a few companies introducing M mount cameras, Epson being one of them. Ricoh subsequently did that, and then also Konica also released M mount cameras as well as Minolta. So quite a few cameras actually making M mount lenses, M mount camera for use with Leica M mount cameras. I'll do the around M mount camera using M mount lenses.
You can also get a lot of very cheap M mount modern lenses, manual lenses. You know, like from TT Artisan, or I think Lauer does M mount. I think so.
Lauer does M mount, yes.
If you want affordable, you can buy new, affordable, rather good M mount lenses. If you like a couple of $100, it's stupid, and they're quite good.
Yeah, I mean,
so if only we still had the RD.
If you know, the RD is going for a lot of money these days, and
is it?
Yeah, if you're trying to Google it, oh my goodness, the price has shot up, and then I don't think you can find a decent mint one for less than like £1,800 nowadays.
God.
Yeah, so it's very expensive, very, very expensive. But yeah, it's a cracking camera. It's really a cracking camera. I think that they should reintroduce that at some point, and that would be my dream. If one does exist, whether it's from whoever manufactures, hopefully it will be a rangefinder camera company, whether it's going to be a Zeiss or whatever, I want something who make rangefinder cameras to remake something like that. That will be something that I would pay for, I don't know why Leica would never went with that kind of route, that sort of route to reintroduce a kind of like a proper M3 reproductions when they have the actual menu cranking, all kinds of stuff, just like the RD. Why don't they introduce something like that and make it like literally completely digital? I'm not entirely sure. And
I think Leica is in a difficult position because their products are practically defined by the audience. They Leica can't really decide what to make these days because there's so many collectors. All the people who buy Leicas have so much influence with the company that they have to make what the collectors want and what the traditionalists want. So I think they're in a difficult position, to be honest. But yeah, bring the RT1. The RT1, live view didn't exist in those days, did it?
No.
So you couldn't switch on the screen and compose your shots that way. That didn't happen.
The only thing you can do is to review the images in an ultra low resolution screen, so it doesn't really help either. So that's what I'm saying. This camera it really is a proper retro camera. I mean, since we talk about this, that will be the king of it. Simply because even though it has an LCD screen, you can't use it for live view. And when it comes to reviewing images, it's so low resolution you can't even check sharpness with it. And so you really have to trust your ability to photograph a scene with proper exposures and proper focusing, and that is something.
Wasn't there like a MD that didn't even have a screen?
And yes.
So it was actually quite fun to use. I took it out a couple of times because that's the hard thing of going back to an old camera where you don't know what you've got till the film comes back from the lab. With the Leica MG, you didn't know till you got back to your desk and put the memory card in your computer. And it's quite nice because, you had to do it properly. You had to work out the exposure and do it right.
I have a habit nowadays, and ever since I switched to mirrorless, before DSLR, their back screen's always exposed, in all the DSLRs. You can't turn it, flip it. I know some modern ones can now, but the older DSLR certainly cannot. So the screen's always on. I know you can switch it off in the menu, but I do a practice these days, just trying to stop me from chimping. I don't know if people have remember this term chimping. Basically, every time you take a shot, you look down and look at the screen again, check the images every single time you press a shutter. I always do this now, but just closing the flap completely, so I don't look at it. I just shoot it.
There's an understanding in writing that you can't create and edit at the same time. They're two different mental states. And I think that applies to photography. You can't be a creative photographer if you're creating in one instant and then editing in another, because you're constantly flipping between creative and critical thinking.
Yeah.
And you don't end up doing either of them properly. If you're in a creative zone, shoot. If you're in a critical zone, edit. But if you interleave them all the time, you're going to end up in a bit of a mess.
So you can see a lot. All my cameras here have the screen flap inside out. I don't show the screen, and actually I do this not by storing it and or put it in the bag or put it in the shelf. I actually shoot with the screen closed all the time. I don't look at images. I just shoot, and I look at the images afterward when I come back home. And then that's my practice, and I just don't like to miss. First of all, don't like to miss the moment. Second, like what Rod just said, I'm in this creative zone there, and so I'm just trying to focus on what I'm shooting, what I'm looking at through the viewfinder, and absorb the environment more than getting distracted by the back screen. And because I know if I do that, I was starting to, first of all, missing the moment, some important moment that might actually happening in front of me, and second is obviously it switch off my creative mode, like you said, into a completely different mode.
I don't know if anybody else gets this, but I find if I'm out taking photographs, you have to be in the right state of mind, and it's quite a fragile thing. Some days you go out and you can't see anything, and you can't be bothered with anything, you
Yeah,
can't make anything work. You just have to give up. Other days it takes half an hour wandering around, suddenly you kind of the gears mesh and you see
yeah,
the
yeah,
pictures,
yeah,
and it's not something you can't just switch it on and off. So when you are in the mood and you are in a zone,
yeah.
don't wreck it.
No,
Just go with
no.
it, and then see what the pictures are like later. That's what I would say.
That's right. Robin is in the house. Say hello to Robin. That's another
Hi,
one of
Robin.
my one of my great friends. Yes, a shout out to him. He's in the channel now. He said he can't stay for too long, but it's hi anyway. Hopefully you're good. Yeah, we are very very well. As you can see, we talk about retro cameras today, and interesting topic. Maybe a bit heated as well, and then depending on how you look at it. And so Robin, since you're here in the house, would you like to see a PEN EP2? Would you like to see one? I'm not sure. Like how everybody feels. Depending on the how OM system feel about the whole retro markers that they actually created in the past, and it will be a good throwback. To be honest, it will be a good throwback for a lot of loyal Olympus
Actually,
fan.
actually, I've worked out what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some vinyl skins made up in like maybe tan or grey or some other material. Get some little stickers saying PEN EP2. Stick those over the logo on the camera, and then just buy loads of old PEN EP2s and sell them on eBay for what's the price? $13.99. Let's go with that. Let's go with that.
Yeah,
That'll
yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. That'll work. That'll work. Because all you need is to change the top plate, right? Because just the PEN EP, you just add a little two mark there, say PEN EP2.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or PEN F. What did Nikon do? PEN FC. No, PEN FF. No, that's not going to work. No. something like that.
Ah, well, and yes, it's certainly interesting. I think that's the whole camera discussions there. But now let's talk a little bit of photography now before we wrap up today, because we would like to maybe mention a product is particular as the DxO's Film Pack 7. Is it 7 now? I don't know.
Yep. Announced today.
Announced
36
today.
minutes ago.
Yes, and then I'm not sure how many of you have used any sort of digital film simulation softwares, and there are absolutely a ton out there nowadays. The Lumina has some kind of film simulations. I know Visco has some, and DxO has some. Even DxO's own Nik software has film simulations, and I know it's a bit conflicting products there, but the film pack itself is quite different to Nik Collection's Analog Effects Pro thing. That's the one that has the film simulations on.
And color effects does,
yes,
and silver effects if you want to look at it that way. Yeah,
the silver effects has black and white only, and then the color effects has the I can't remember which one is which now.
Old photo modes, and it does attempt to simulate modern films, but it's just kind of going for a broad look, whereas Film Pack 7 is trying to do things scientifically and technically. And I think the thing about Film Pack 7 is how you use it, because if you use a standalone program and let it just take the raw files without any interference from any other software, you're probably going to get a more accurate representation. Or if you use it within DxO Photolab, again, it can apply its particular renderings before any other tools mess with it. If you use it as a plugin from Lightroom, it can only work with what Lightroom has already done to your raw files, so you're going to get a somewhat different result. But it's I think what's interesting is that when everyone was shooting film, they were fed up that it wasn't technically accurate, and now that digital cameras are technically accurate, we kind of miss film being unpredictable and inaccurate and wonky and in other ways imperfect. We miss the imperfect. Now that we can make things perfect, I think, well, I'd say I think a lot of photographers feel, oh, this is very disappointing. Suddenly it's all got very boring.
Yeah. Well, you look at the likes of Polaroid users. One of my friends also a Polaroid ambassador, and then I asked him why do you like Polaroid so much? He said, "Oh, it's the unpredictability. I don't know what the outcome is like. I don't know
Yeah.
what the colors looks like. I don't even know what he's gonna look like until you actually taking a shot." And then yeah,
Well,
that's
the other thing about instant film is that there's only one. You make a photograph, and that's the only photograph there is or will ever be. You could copy it or scan it or photograph it,
yeah,
but there is only one original. It's a unique physical object. And it's almost like that with black and white prints, because no matter how good you are in a darkroom, how many notes you take, you'll
yeah. You
never
can recreate
produce,
it.
you'll never get the same print twice.
No,
It'll always
no.
be slightly different. So it's the kind of uniqueness of film has
Yes.
been lost, and even really stupid stuff that shouldn't be a positive. Like I always used to shoot Kodachrome, and the fortnight you waited between sending the film off and
Yep.
when the little yellow box came back through the letterbox, it was almost as if the wait increased the sense of anticipation and engagement
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
photographs you took. Digital is so easy
Mm.
that you don't feel, well, I don't feel there's quite the same sense of engagement with the images
Yeah.
because there is almost no effort. And
No, I mean,
sometimes the effort gives things value.
yeah, I certainly think so. Like I don't know. A lot of you who are listening now may not be as old as we are, so so
This
you
is
you
old as
may
I am.
you may not have come across a lot of the stuff that Rod and I are talking about. Film, doing positive films and developments. They come back with boxes and have this slide kind of, if you ask
Yeah.
for a slide being mounted, for instance, and in a box, and then yeah,
Yeah,
they
sorry, I should have explained. Yeah, sorry.
the anticipations is definitely something that I kind of miss, and I remember
Yeah.
I when I used to travel, I took 10 rolls of film. 10 rolls a lot. 10 rolls only 360 frames is a lot in the old days. Not nowadays. You can take 360 in a day in a digital. And but like the anticipation is kind of what interests me the most. You took all those photos, you don't even know what it was gonna look like, how they turn out, whether over, underexposed, whether you messed up with the focus or anything like that. You literally have to wait until the prints came back, and you see,
Yeah.
oh wow, I got a shot. Oh no, I didn't. Oh shit, I should have done this and that. It was that weight that kind of that
Yeah.
makes photography fun at a time, and I kind of miss that. Now everything's so handy now, like you said, instant. You literally can look at a photo straight away in the back screen. It may not be the end results because you might likely shoot raw and you want to further process, and if you really want, like we just talked about, DxO Film Pack 7 then give you that kind of film looking colors, and it's still not, I wouldn't still say 100%, but it's getting close to a certain look that you may be craving for if you're into kind of like analog photography aesthetics.
But do you think as well there's been a kind of physical or sensory loss as well? We no longer have boxes of prints that
No.
we can, sit in an armchair and just like pour through. We don't have contact sheets we can draw on.
Yeah. Oh,
The
contact
the
sheet. I love contact sheets.
when you open it, you open a box of slides. So there's a
Yeah.
particular smell, isn't there?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
there's
Yeah. Yeah.
also
Yeah.
the smell of freshly made developer. I mean, it all sounds really, really stupid in today's digital context, but
Yes. Yes.
the lot of the physicality of photography has gone.
Yeah.
It's
And
quite strange.
also, I mean, like now in this kind of topics, I mean, there's one thing that I want to mention in particular about contact sheets, just kind of relating to it. Like digital photographers nowadays shoot a ton of frames. In any given moment, like especially like we are now talking about burst speed of like 60, 70, 100, 200 frames per second. So literally a second you get 200 photos. That's crazy, right? I mean, in the old day, you're talking about like 4.5 frames per second. Like any sort of like with motor drive, and so they're not extremely fast speed. Even in the later days in in the more advanced SLRs, just before the digital evolutions, they were shooting at maximum 12 frames per second, and that is a very fast SLR. Minolta Dynex 9 has the fastest mechanical shutter, and then it did have the 12 frames per second, so that was pretty fast for any standard. but you're still not looking at hundreds of frames at any one time. So contact sheet works really well because you don't have to troll through a ton of those stuff and look for the best one. And but my point is, now with the ability of shooting so many frames, yes, you are very likely to find a perfect frame or the perfect moment within that time span. And but then again, I think it loses some of the magic that we used to do in the dark room when you when you look at contact sheets and you starting to look at more than just the moments. It's more than just the technical sharpness or technical perfections of the photograph. We're looking at way more things, because looking at contact sheet is a very different experience than looking at a screen, for instance. And I think so anyway. And I think the process is definitely more fluid, and then definitely easier for me to actually find a frame that I actually like. Because nowadays I find myself sometimes, if I shoot burst, for instance, I end up with hundreds of photos and I look through them. I would do literally 3 stages of filtering. I have to first of all filter out all the crappy ones, underexposed or out of focus one. I'll first get rid of all of them first. Then I go to second stages, look at the one that I think the subject is in the right position or whatever. Then I'll filter those out. Then the third stage is trying to find one that I think it will represent what I wanted to capture. And so like, it's a lot more work and not necessarily enjoyable either, because you're looking through so many images, and it's time consuming, tiring to your eyes, and let alone wasting storage. That's another thing. The olden times, I think I miss that. I miss that kind of very easy process when it comes to assessing an image, through a contact sheet.
I don't know whether you feel this as well or whether this is just me, but I think my psychology has changed. So if I go out now, I can shoot as many pictures as I like at no cost, and I'll shoot I'll shoot a couple of hundred, and I'll get back and find it's the same shot 200 times. When I went out with the 36 exposure film, I would make damn sure that I had 36 different photographs. So I think what digital cameras have done, they've kind of made me more repetitious. It's easy to overlook the fact, just because you've taken a lot of shots, that they're all the same shot, or you think you've taken 300 or 400, you've only taken 3 or 4. But with film, I would take 36 different photographs, and I kind of think if there was some way to make myself do that today, I would do it. But it's not something. Yes. It is hard. You have it's an artificial discipline that nobody's going to apply. But with film, it's kind of a limitation that forced you into behaving in a different way.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly the number of exposures per roll is a main limitation factor there. If you carry only 2 rolls out, that's the 2 rolls you get. That's 72 exposure. If you can't possibly think that will last you for the day. So you have to be very disciplined yourself, making sure that you are capturing something different every time.
You're not going to shoot the same shot twice just for insurance. I mean, pros might have bracketed shots back in the day, but that's for a different reason. I mean, now you see, I don't know if anyone else has this, but you go out, you think, that's a great shot. I better take it 2 or 3 times just in case. It's nonsense. The first time was fine. Well, but you just end up with this kind of inflated shot list.
Yes.
Where you really haven't got variety that you set out to get.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it doesn't help that you see all a photography channel on YouTube and influencers, the way they shoot, let's say, even portrait, not talk about sports, portrait, you see them, how they use the camera. They will literally put in burst mode with eye trackings on, and they follow the subject, literally taking like 100 shots, and they show one. And that's kind of like an educational process for those who are new to photography. It's like, oh, this is the way to shoot a portrait. You just basically machine gun the thing, having tracking on, and that's how you shoot. but
Yeah.
that actually isn't the way to shoot a portrait. You have to talk to the subject, learn about the characters. You need to expose them as a human being, what he or she is like. You need to know a lot of stuff before you press that shutter button. It's not just about movement is something that you do afterward. Once you learn about a subject, you learn about how they would like to do things, and you maybe start to animate them a little bit, and you can do something fun. But I think a lot of those videos a lot of them are just simply over exaggerations, maybe perhaps more showcasing the technologies more than actual skill sets, or the essence of portrait photography. But I'm just talking about portrait for once because that's something I'm interested in. And but I'm pretty sure, like, if you watch other type of genre photography channel, they do similar thing. All they do these days is just burst shooting everything. And I don't see anyone who shoot film would do that. And then there are some film or analog channels on YouTube, and they do one frame at a time. I know it's a different type of thing, different style, everything's different altogether. But I personally think that as a photographer, you should have a little bit of discipline in some way, just trying to make sure that, you retain that a little bit. Not saying that you shouldn't burst shooting, if you're in a commercial environment, like I am in some cases. That's why I do burst shoots, because as a commercial, I need to hand in my work. So I need to make sure that, the work is presentable. So I need to have that insurance in my mind. And being digital is one convenience for me as a money-making photographer, is that I can keep shooting making in bursts, so that I know for a fact that the one or two shots definitely going to work. But if I do it for myself, it's a very different story altogether, because I want to have quality shots. I don't want quantity shots.
No, no. By putting your attention on quantity, you're taking it away from the quality. So very often you need to spend a lot of time looking at a scene or a subject to figure out how it's going to work and how you want to capture it. And you can't do that in burst mode. You can only do it by walking around and looking and trying a couple of shots to see which ones you like. Another thing I've noticed, by the way, is that sometimes some shots work better as thumbnails than they do blown up. And some shots that look great blown up make terrible thumbnails. And this is and it sounds like a very frivolous thing to say, but it affects how you look at contact sheets. They're quite good because they make you look at the image from afar. So I saw one of the comments was, use a loop. My larger lens was never good enough to make contact sheets with that kind of definition. But I still find looking at thumbnails tells me a lot more about composition and overall visual effectiveness than looking at a full screen image. Even if I'm editing an image, say I'm applying a graduated filter to darken the sky, I'd rather have the thumbnail off to the side, because then I can see how it's affecting the image in a kind of very broad sense. You can get too close to a photograph when you're editing it.
Yes. Well, that's the trouble, right? When you're looking at full-size image on the screen, you tend to pixel peep, blowing it in now and check critical focus and, trying to check a lot of details instead of actually stepping back and looking at the overall framing and then to look at the picture altogether.
It's definitely happens to me with HDR. You say you've got an image on the screen, fill in the screen, you're trying to bring out the shadows, tone down highlights, getting detail everywhere, nice kind of micro contrast, local contrast, saturation, all the rest. You've done a brilliant job till you look at the thumbnail and you think that is just flat. There's no light and shade across the whole image, because you need that in an image. You need areas of light and dark. But when you're too close to it, you can't evaluate it properly.
Yes, that definitely. And I mean, we always say, to look at an image, you shouldn't actually use a magnifying glass and go into, and check focus and things like that. You should actually step away from it, look at the image, and see whether it speaks to you. And the only way to see that is just not to look close up. You have to come back and just to see it from distance. And that's the whole kind of fun thing about photography. And contact sheet, another thing is, is good at is actually looking at the frames as a story. You know, like because
Yeah.
in the old days we don't shoot what we do today. You know, like taking hundreds and hundreds of frames. Like we said, you only had about 36 frame in 135 or maybe 24, and even 120 you get less. You know, 120 you probably only get like about 8 shots. So like, but you can see the series quite easily. You know, the sequence, and that way you can analyze your thought process in when you're creating these images and whether they flow or not from one shot to the other. Nowadays it's really difficult to see that because you've got so many shots and it's hard from looking at one shot and see immediately the next shot whether it's relating or not. You don't, because the next shot could be 200 frames down. So you're losing that continuity.
Exactly the trouble with looking at thumbnails in Lightroom or Capture One or any other program. You have too many. The screen is filled with similar shots. You don't get the same kind of storytelling variety in a single window that you need. But with contact sheets and prints, you could have a print of every negative on a 36 exposure roll and go through them and trying to pick the best and say, oh, I don't know, they're all good. But then you pick up the contact sheet and you know straight away, it's that one.
I mean, I think that's a book. It's a Magnum book. It's called Contact Sheet. You should, and if people are interested,
I've heard of it. Yeah.
You should get that book. It really interesting book because you see how a photographer picked a specific frame or frames. If you pick a 2 or 3 shots that is in the sequence. Interesting book. You guys should have a look at it. How critical they are to themselves when it comes to photography, because they look at the shots. Even though you look at the contact sheet, some of the shot you may think, oh, that is really cool shot, but he actually ignored them. You know, he chose another shot. It's really interesting in terms of studying and looking at understanding how people utilizing contact sheets in the past, and how that may actually help you to take photograph in modern digital photography, because you should have some sort of similar thought process when it comes to selecting the image that you want, because it's a very interesting process, even though it may not apply 100% in today's modern digital world. But you know, certain discipline still applies when it comes to selecting the right images for your photography. So that is pretty cool. I don't know how we get to that. I thought we'd talk about retro stuff.
we are. We're talking about contact sheets.
Yeah, we can
got there.
We can talk about contact sheet in a separate chat altogether, because that is, I think to me is very interesting, and I certainly got a bit animated for that.
Yeah. So retro.
I'm just looking at what a comment there. John actually say that it's cost about $15 a row. You are lucky. $15.
Yeah.
You are lucky. $15. I literally just checked Amazon this morning. It cost us £15 a row. Pound, not dollars. So we actually paying more than you guys, and it's ridiculous how expensive they are nowadays. But fortunately, I have a stock. You know, I actually keep one fridge full of full of old films. So I still have hundreds of rolls in my fridge, and they may expire already, so the color may not be 100% accurate.
But they're worth more. You can charge more for expired films. That's the thing. That is definitely a thing for retro shooters, expired film.
I think my fridge films would cost more than the fridge itself now.
You should open an eBay shop, sell them at expired films, £20 a roll.
I have all kinds of dead stocks, you know, like and also some formats that you can't even buy them these days. I mean, I have a lot of old film stocks that don't exist or cease productions. Yeah, quite a big selection of them. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if I will have to spend and use those films, it has to be very special now, because they don't make them anymore. It's something that I kind of treasure. Those films and just a little corner of my studio and have these films inside. It's
that one. Something's become so precious you can't use it.
I know. It's just I find it quite difficult to open one now. You know, I'd rather spend 15 quid in just buy a standard Kodak somewhere and a Fuji somewhere and just use them. Andrew asked me, do I have any 620? I have a couple of rolls of 620, not many now, and I have a couple of them. And mostly 120s and large format. I think I don't have any large format anymore. and I used to collect them for some reasons.
I think if you're in the States, you might be slightly better off, because I think I looked into this for an article a while back. Now, B&H
Yep.
back then at least seemed to have pretty good stocks of large format film, but I don't know if that's still the case. I might be completely wrong now.
Yeah, it's a, you know, like, as much as I like film, you know, they are getting costly. That's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
one factor that stops me from shooting film these days, just because they get so
yeah,
expensive. And I mean, like what John said, you know, like, not only just you buy them, but you have to process them.
yeah.
Yeah, it adds up the cost. So, like, unless it's something really really special that I'm not really shooting film these days, and it's gone to digital, yeah, I you know, because I'm a commercial photographer, I mean, I make money from photography, you know, film, it comes to the point that I think it's becoming not cost viable, you know, to do anything with
Unless
film commercially.
unless you reach the point where you have a client who says, "I want this shot on film, and I don't know how much I don't care how much it costs. Can you do it?"
Well, funny enough, you asked that, because I have a lot of American clients, and they told me that their weddings were shot in films, and I said, how much did you spend on those stuff? Oh, it's a lot of money. So yeah,
Yeah,
we don't have that market existing in Britain, because
not so much.
we,
No,
we don't have the same kind of budget when it comes to that sort of you know, retro analog shooting experience. I know that the
yeah,
States has been in fashion for quite a while now in terms of using films, and they don't mind paying for it. So, like, a wedding photography session can cost you 15 grand, you know, but they had that budget to spend in the state, or that's the
yeah,
normal budget they spend in the States. But 15 grand is definitely not a budget in Britain when it comes to wedding photography. So there's the differences
yeah.
there, and I like to do that, you know, if there's a chance, and because yeah, it will be quite fun to shoot analog again, you know, because I brought up with analog. I shot my first few weddings in analog, so I kind of missed that.
I seem to remember when I was using transparency film, a 36 exposure Kodachrome 64 or Fujifilm Velvia, processing included. I thought it was getting a bit steep when it got to £5. Oh, this is a lot of money.
Wow, wow. The first a positive that I developed with mounting and everything, that came to £10. I thought that was expensive. Yo, you told me that
Yeah,
£5 that's cheap.
yeah, yeah. If I was buying Tri-X or Ilford HP5 or Pan F or whatever, I used to think I used to buy it in fives or tens to try and get it under £1 a roll.
Oh gosh.
It took a bit of doing, but yeah, but certainly
The
if
problem, yeah, the problem with the modern labs now, you know, even if you shoot black and white, even technically, developing black and white films are actually cheaper than color, but they charge you more because they have to change solutions of the machine, so they
yeah,
have to do it in
yeah,
batches. And that's why if
yeah,
I shoot black and white film now, I tend to use XP4, which is you can use
it's
C45.
chromogenic, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
use that to process the black and white film, so you don't have to have a specific lab to do it, or you know, change over to process them. So
It's quite a different look though, isn't it? XP5. It's not
XP5, yeah, it's definitely
XP1. Sorry,
it's
is it
definitely less.
XP1, XP2?
I think port
Yeah,
XP4. It's definitely less contrasty compared to, you know,
yeah,
HP5 and all the
yeah.
others, and less contrasty.
The
But then
the
again,
grain's a bit different.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I think it's a little bit smoother for some reasons,
It's it
and
is it is smooth, but it's like dye grain, isn't it, rather than silver grain?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it,
yeah.
it,
You
it's
don't have the
it's
same
kind of
punch.
overlapping grain effect rather than
Yeah, you
distinct
you
crystals.
definitely don't have
Yeah,
that punch like a traditional black and white,
no,
and you know,
no,
it definitely won't have the same contrast level like a Tri-X. That's for sure.
no, no, no.
Yeah. Okay, right. So that wraps up today's talk, I guess. And so it's been phenomenal, and it's quite interesting to talk about all this retro stuff. And before we end today, let me show you another Rod camera, because he likes this one.
You got a yeah, you got a denim one.
Yes, I got a
God
denim
damn it!
one. Yes,
Why,
yes.
Jimmy? Why do you have all the cameras that by rights I ought to have? That
I
doesn't
don't.
seem quite fair.
I've done some research before I start this show. I knew that you like some of those cameras that I have, so I'm gonna make sure that I have it in
Got
front of you.
got Leica, you've got Pen F, you've got an EPL9 or 8 or whichever one that was. I'm
That's a
going to keep
9
quiet.
EPO 9.
That's a 9.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, guys, before we end the show, And then remember to subscribe and like and follow this chat room. And we're going to do another episode next week. And yeah, just remember, retro camera. Let me know in the comment section below. What would you like to see? And from any manufacturer, not necessarily Olympus system or whoever, you know, what kind of camera would you like to see? A retro looking or remake of certain cameras that you really wanted to any manufacturer to make digital again. For instance, you know, it could be a new RD, you know, well, we just talked about RD, you know, like a rangefinder camera. I have a proper manual cranking actions, you know, for each exposure, and maybe a slightly more advanced, technologically savvy PEN F2 if you wanted to have modern kind of retro-looking shell, yet having all the digital capabilities. Or
Pentax Spotmatic, that's all you need, Jimmy. Pentax Spotmatic.
Rod say a Pentax, and maybe, you know, give us a thought about the latest Nikon Zf and ZFC, and see whether you know, a combination of these cameras that you would like to see happening again, and that will be quite interesting. And also, one final note is that whether you think this retro theme is coming back in fashion, because I certainly feel it. I certainly think that it is coming back, and this is something that I again say that I'm hoping Olympus system will have a second look again to join the party before it's too late, or join the party that they started in the first place. Okay,
come back to the party.
Come back to the party and start leading again. And so thank you guys for joining, and I will speak to you all very soon. And in the meantime, stay creative. Just keep shooting. Go out and enjoy yourself with the beautiful, beautiful weather wherever you are. We certainly have some sun
Not
today,
here.
so okay, great stuff. Until next time, see you soon. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.